Welcome to Movies We Like, part of the True Story FM Entertainment Podcast Network. I'm Andy Nelson, and that over there is Pete Wright.
Present and accounted for.
On today's episode, we have invited film distribution company Deaf Crocodile's co-founders, Dennis Bartok and Craig Rogers, to talk about Felidae, a movie they like. Gentlemen, welcome to the podcast. Hello.
Welcome.
Hello.
Thanks for having us on.
Yeah, we're thrilled to have you here to chat with us about what you two are up to about this particular movie, which is a great one to chat about, and just kind of like film distribution in general, which, you know, this is exciting because while generally on this show, we're talking about a wide variety of people from different parts of the film industry, whether they're directors, cinematographers, composers, makeup artists, whatever. This is our first time jumping onto the other side and talking to distributors and talking about kind of what that world is like, especially in the modern age where we are with physical media, the way that it's the focus has shifted in physical media and distribution. So let's just kind of start digging in. I'd love to hear a little bit about you two and your backgrounds. Dennis, do you want to start?
Sure. See, my background was born and raised mostly in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My mom was an avant-garde artist, filmmaker, conceptual artist. So I grew up around her making experimental films with a 16 millimeter Bolex camera. She also had a brief career in Japanese B movies in the late 1950s when she lived in Tokyo, which is kind of an amazing sideline.
Yeah.
And I studied filmmaking in the 1980s at New York University, worked for a little while after college for Robert De Niro's production company in New York City. And then I came out here to LA in 1992, worked on and off for about 30 years for a nonprofit film group called the American Cinematheque, where I was the head of programming. For many years, I would, pick what films we were screening. I would track down the 35 millimeter or 70 millimeter prints. I would interview the filmmakers, everyone from Charlton Heston to Janet Leigh to Nicole Kidman to Guillermo del Toro came to the Cinematheque over the years. And then at the same time, I was also working as a screenwriter. I sold several scripts to 20th Century Fox and to New Line. And then I produced and wrote an anthology horror film called Trapped Ashes that we recently restored and re-released in 4K, UHD, and Blu-ray with episodes directed by Joe Dante, Ken Russell, Monty Hellman, and other filmmakers.
Nice.
Kind of a Tales from the Crypt creep show anthology horror film. And then in 2015, 2016, I wrote and directed a supernatural horror film in Ireland called Nails, produced by Fantastic Films and starring Shauna McDonald and Ross Noble and Steve Wall, that's streamed on Netflix from like 2018 to 2020. So I've done a lot of things, involving the film industry.
Yeah, sure.
Got to for-profit and non-profit, making these screening films. And then for the past 10 years, Craig and I have worked together at now Deaf Crocodile is the third company we worked together at. The first was called Cinelicious Pictures. And we restored and re-released Eiichi Yamamoto's psychedelic animated film, Belladonna of Sadness, Toshio Matsumoto's amazing transgender drama, Funeral Parade of Roses, Private Property. We next worked together at a company called Arbelos Films, where Craig oversaw the restoration of Bellatar's 7.5-hour Satan Tango and a number of other films.
Oof.
And then 4.5 years ago, we started Deaf Crocodile together, and we now have close to 70 films in our library. We release a really wide, eclectic range of world cinema titles, both new and vintage. a lot of world animation. In particular, we're going to talk about Felidae.
Right.
And a lot of the films that we release, we restore in-house. Craig is our in-house restoration wizard. So probably 60 to 70% of the movies we put out, we're actually restoring ourselves so that they can distribute it.
Wow.
Nice. Amazing.
It doesn't seem possible. It's been 4.5 years.
Yeah.
10 plus going back to Cinelicious seems right, but
Yep.
since it's just been the two of us with Deaf Crocodile, it's been such a whirlwind. It seems like 2 at most.
Well, and to be fair, we're all in that COVID brain.
Yeah.
since
That's true.
2000,
We did
2020,
decide to start up a new company during COVID. That was smart. Let's distribute movies during COVID.
Yeah.
'Cause, yeah.
We started at absolute zero with
Oh yeah, we had no
no
film.
films in our library.
Yeah.
Basically no money, nothing except our sort of know-how and the fact that we had worked together previously. We said, okay, we're going to go from here. And now, 4.5 years later, we've got a ton of films. We've been really fortunate to work with all these amazing filmmakers. So
That's awesome. Well, and I just want to shout out over at Cinelicious. One of the other releases that you did was Gangs of Wasseypur, which Pete and I talked about over on our Next
We
Reel
sure did.
podcast.
Oh my
which is
God, what a film.
Quite a movie. Yeah.
it's amazing. Yeah, we were really lucky to license that and put it out. One of our favorite releases at Cinelicious. I'm a huge fan of both contemporary and classic Indian cinema. We released through Deaf Crocodile several wonderful contemporary Indian and Southeast Asian filmmakers. Atul Mishra's Village House, Dewey, Moomba Ride is another amazing film.
Children of the Sun.
Yeah, Gandhi,
which is a great like historical drama.
Yeah.
Most of all those are available streaming. We haven't had a physical release on them, but they're really great films that are getting overlooked. So please, if anyone listening, check out what we have streaming, and those films are really, really good.
And we would love to restore and release some rare and classic Indian and Bollywood cinema. I'm a huge fan of filmmakers like Guru Dutt, Devanand, and a lot of the classic actors of that period from the 50s, 60s, 70s. It's really difficult to find materials and clear rights, I have to say.
Interesting.
That is something we're still working on, is trying to put out some really amazing rare and classic Indian cinema. We're not giving up, but
you'll get there. Yeah.
10 plus years we've been working on it. It's tough.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, Craig, let's talk a little bit about your background and kind of your your history, where you came from, and your passion for film, and moving into, it sounds like, is in particular the restoration side of things.
Yeah, my love of films began. I was lucky enough to have it was a store that sold. I think they bought out video stores, and so they just had like this giant room full of used VHS tapes, and I would go there every week and get a stack. And I didn't know anything. I didn't know who anybody. My mom mostly was like, "Oh yeah, Humphrey Bogart is real good," or Francis Ford Coppola is supposed to be good, and so she would throw out these names, and I'd see the tapes, and so like every week I would leave. I think I bought like 5 tapes a week at least, for going on for a long time.
Wow.
And that just introduced me to Coppola and Scorsese and De Niro, and those are the ones I really fell in love with at first. And then some of the old classics, James Cagney and Humphrey Bogart, I really liked. And then the more I got into it, then I started noticing the cinematography and Vittorio Storaro jumped out at me, and I was just like, I realized, I'm like, man, that's just incredible. And so I got into like really liking that. I ended up moving from VHS to a Laserdisc player. And on the Laserdisc, I found this documentary called Visions of Light that was all about cinematography. That was just an amazing documentary. That really got me like really liking it. And then weirdly, one evening, I think my mom called me and told me to turn on the TV. And she's like, "Hey, I put it on like ABC, I think it was." And there was a miniseries, a really bad miniseries, so bad it was supposed to be 5 nights, and I think after 3 they stopped showing it.
They gave up.
But the key was that one of the leads in it was a friend of mine from high school.
Oh, okay.
And for whatever reason, it just clicked in me that like, oh, like working in the film industry it's a job. Like anyone can just like, if that's what you want to do, like get a job in that industry. Because it didn't even, as much as I loved films, it never occurred to me, well, like, oh, I could be involved somehow. So almost immediately I was like, well, I need to go to film school. And, you know, being a Scorsese devotee, I'm like, well, I need to go to NYU. And then I saw how expensive it was, and I am not going to NYU. And then, so then reality set in, and I actually found like it was more of a trade school out here in Los Angeles called Columbia College Hollywood. And packed up, moved to LA, and started going there. To be a cinematographer, because I wanted to be the next Vittorio Storaro.
Gotcha.
And in my very first cinematography class, I realized that making those beautiful pictures involved mostly just math. And I was like, oh no, that's not for me.
This has been a horrible mistake.
But I fell in love with editing. And so got an internship at this editing house that mostly did like put together press kits and trailers. Absolutely loved it. Figured I'd probably go that direction. But then how did I end up I ended up dropping out of school because I couldn't find a paying job. That internship was unpaid, and I couldn't get a paid gig. So I kind of washed my hands of the industry altogether and decided in the mid 90s to go into travel, which was just before the internet destroyed that industry.
Your timing so far is impeccable.
Yes, right.
Yes. So I found myself without a job, and reached out to the place I'd had the internship. And then also a friend I had met when I was in school was working at IMAX. And then the same week, I got 2 job offers to work at the editing place or work at IMAX. And I really was torn. I kind of preferred I would go the editing route, but I figured that's not as safe. So I took the safer route and went with IMAX, and I ended up there for 11 years.
Wow. Okay.
And kind of was in charge of, that was just when they had just done Fantasia 2000. So it was the first, they were just getting into trying to release like Hollywood films on IMAX.
Sure. Yeah.
And so I was worked trying to figure out how to make that feasible, because we only had like really old school film recorders that took almost 2 minutes per frame to output. And then with the Hollywood films, they were trying to, put them out, at the same time as the film releases. And then IMAX wouldn't get the materials until the last minute because they're working on the film until the last minute. And we're like, well, that doesn't work.
Yeah.
at 2 minutes a frame. So I worked with a guy who helped design the film recorder, and we got the 2 minutes down to 33 seconds. Still not fast, but considerably faster than it was. And then figured out a system of, well, instead of having one film recorder, we'll have 14. Split the film up and record out 1,000-foot rolls of IMAX film on 14 film recorders. And the tricky part of that is that they all need to be exactly the same. Or you're going to see color and density changes every time there's a cut. And it was kind of a nightmare, but we managed to pull it off. And so yeah, that was 11 years at IMAX.
Wow.
And towards the end of it, I was introduced to the software called Phoenix because we would use it to clean up scans of negative because it on an IMAX screen, even a small piece of dirt is like giant.
Yeah, huge.
So when I left IMAX, I realized like, well, what I really kind of enjoy is film and history, and I like the idea of restoration. And again, being inspired by Scorsese and his film foundation, I'm like, I want to do film restoration. So I decided to try it on my own. Built a computer and got the Phoenix software that I was familiar with, and reached out to some the first restoration gig I got was with McGillivray Freeman Films.
Okay.
Who
fitting with IMAX? Yeah.
Yeah, I reached out to him because he had and they were like, oh, that's interesting. You're reaching out now because we're actually just thinking about like Greg's old. Before he got into IMAX, he shot surfing films back in the 60s. And so he's like, I wanted to go back and restore those films. So I started restoring his old 16 millimeter reversal surfing films from the 60s. And I needed to find a place that could do a really good scan of 16 millimeter reversal. And there was this place called Cinelicious in Hollywood that was raving about their fancy new scanner. So I went in there and I was like, hey, I need to get this scanned. And the owner of the place, I was there half the day, I think. And we were talking. And before I left, he offered me a job, which I wasn't expecting. I was just going there to get a film scanned. And it just coincided at the same time that my husband was going to be going back to school and only being able to work half time. And I was like, probably should take this job. So I ended up
need it.
So yeah, I ended up at Cinelicious, and then soon after Cinelicious decided like, well, we've been doing all this restoration work for other companies, and they put out the films and get all the credit. And so the owner was like, well, we should just start releasing stuff ourselves. And that's where he reached out to Dennis, and they started Cinelicious Pictures, which was like the distribution part of the company. And now we're all caught up. It's weird how so many little things, there's so many tiny little decisions that change the outcome of where you end up.
Right.
I still wonder, I'm like, would I be editing films today if I had taken that other job instead of IMAX? Like, who knows?
Yeah. It's so hard to say. Go ahead, Pete.
Well, I want to talk about Deaf Crocodile because the thing that fascinates me is the complex organism that is the ecosystem of the kinds of movies that you release, right? You build this reputation for restoring and distributing these obscure and underseen films. And I'd like to know what drives your selection process, right? How do you determine which films deserve rediscovery? And what's it take to acquire the rights and decide what's going to end up helping you make a profit?
Well, deserves the wrong word, because pretty much all films deserve it. It's whether or not we can do it.
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah. Yes, some of the films we put out are ones that I kind of have a list in the back of my head of rare and hard to see movies. Going back to my days in film programming,
Mhm.
and in fact, two of them that we restored and put out are Jean-Louis Roy's wonderful black and white Swiss kind of anti-nuclear war super spy satire, The Unknown Man of Shandagore.
That was our first release, and still one of my favorites. It's so fun,
amazing. And that was a movie that I had read about many years ago and just sort of filed away, like, hey, that would be great to see at some point, and it was just really hard to find. And then The Savage Hunt of King Stack was another one. Valery Rubinczyk's amazing Belarusian folk horror film. And that had kind of been on this little list for about 25, 30 years. And so some of them are ones that I've kind of been interested in for a long time, but a lot of the other ones are ones that through serendipity or people recommend titles to us. Solomon King, Sal Watts' amazing independent black action crime film that he produced, wrote, co-directed, and starred in, made in Oakland, California in 1974. Came about because I came across a copy of the soundtrack album in a used record store and had all these amazing local Oakland R&B soul funk artists on it. And I said, oh, it's fantastic music. I want to track down the film.
Yeah.
And then immediately every reference was lost movie, has not been seen in over 40 years. And
I remember he sent me I think there was a clip of the theme song on YouTube. And he's like, hey, check this out. I found this record and it says it's a lost movie. We should probably look for it. And
I was like, that's what we did.
So I clicked on the link and the first notes of the music, I was like, yeah, I don't care how good or bad the movie is. If that's the soundtrack, we need to find it.
Wow. Okay.
I'm a Prince fan, so I like funk.
Yeah.
And, like I heard that soundtrack and I'm like, oh, we have got to find this.
Sal Watts had his own record label. He produced a local Oakland a cable TV program that showcased local soul funk artists and street dancers. He had a string of urban street fashion stores called Mr. Sal's. He was sort of like the restaurants. He was like the Berry Gordy of Oakley in the 70s. And then, his kind of media empire unfortunately collapsed in the 80s. He wound up going to jail on I think trumped up tax charges. And when he died in 2003, there was no reference in his obituary to any of the work that he had done in film music. It only mentioned that he had owned the Mr. Sal's fashion stores. And so we, again, it's kind of film detective work, tracked down his wife, his widow, Belinda Burton Watts, who was such an incredible person.
The interview with her on the disc is worth buying the disc. Like, even if you don't watch the movie, the interview with her is incredible.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay.
And she said, I've been waiting for, 25 years for the phone to ring and for you to call and say, you want to restore Sal's movies, which she had worked on. They shot in, businesses they owned, in their house. She's in the film at the very end. And she had what she thought was the camera negative sitting in her closet for 25 years. Turns out it was only the soundtrack elements.
Oh.
Still, we had audio but no picture. We found what is apparently the sole surviving print of the original cut of the film at the UCLA Film and TV Archive, which they very generously loaned to us for the restoration. But it was completely faded. It was like purple. And it was a release print. The camera negative, interpositive, internegative, like all those elements seem to have
Disappeared.
vanished many
Jeez.
years ago. So we had
Yeah.
this one print that was purple, and we scanned like 10 seconds of it, and Craig sent it to our colorist Tyler, who lives in Atlanta, and said, can we do anything with this? And he was unbelievably able to restore about 95% of the color. It's really, really difficult with materials that are that badly faded. But we were able to restore the film. It's now screened all over the U.S. It's played twice on Turner Classic Movies. And most importantly, Sal's wife, his kids, his grandchildren, his great.
Yeah, most of them had never seen it.
Yeah, wow, really?
They had just been told that, like, Grandpa. Everyone says that he made a movie, but they had never seen it.
They hadn't even seen it. Wow.
And so, yeah, it was kind of amazing. And we had a screening in San Francisco where a lot of the family was there. It was just funny when the movie starts, and the first time he comes on screen, there was somebody sitting behind me, and then they just yelled out, they're like, "That's my daddy!" Because so most of them had never seen it. They just had heard about it, but
wow,
they'd never seen it.
And we've been able to, pay royalties to his wife, Belinda. She did an incredible 2.5-hour interview, moderated by Jonathan Marlowe, that's on the disc, that is as important as the film itself. And we love the movie because it captures this incredible sort of time capsule of Black fashion, music, culture, the neighborhoods in Oakland in the mid 70s, many of which are completely transformed and gone. So even from sort of like a documentary perspective, although it's a fiction, it's a action crime film, and it's sort of kind of Dolomite meets Shaft vein. But it's an amazing document that preserves what Black music and culture and fashion looked like at that time in Oakland, California. And so that's, of the restorations we've done, that's probably the one that we're proudest of, because the film was so completely lost. I think there was a 30-second TV commercial was all that survived Solomon King until we met Belinda and worked on the restoration and re-release. We're just so happy that, this film went from being completely disappeared to playing on Turner Classic Movies across the U.S., and people could appreciate Sal and Belinda's work all those years ago in Oakland is amazing. Return him to his sort of rightful place in the history of Oakland music and film, and that's great. So that's the kind of work when we do that we're just really happy to be able to shine a light on some of these kind of gems of film that have slipped through the cracks. Felidae being another one that was really difficult to.
It is great when they have slipped through the cracks, and the filmmakers just assume
it's not going to happen.
It's gone.
Right.
Nobody cares. And then to let them know is like, no, like, people do care. I mean, I worked for a while in like as an art rep for some comic book artists, and it was interesting to like talk to some of these artists, and like as a fan, you assume like they are aware that people love their work, but they aren't, they're just at home doing their thing.
Sure. Yeah.
And it's just, you should remember that, like, they don't, their perspective is completely different than ours as fans, they're it's just like, oh, that's something I did 40 years ago,
And hey, I haven't really thought about it.
So it can be exciting for them as well, that like, oh, like this thing I did 40 years ago and forgot about is
suddenly having
Somebody's
somebody
still
else-
thinking about it.
Yeah, somebody cares about it. What, really?
well,
Yeah,
it's
we
such
got
an
We
it's
got
an
email
interesting
this
field.
morning from Jean-François Le Guillaume, who is this amazing French filmmaker and animator. And this month we've released his first film. It's an absolute masterpiece called Gwen and the Book of Sand. It's a post-apocalyptic animated film about a teenage girl and her 173-year-old nomad companion going on this epic journey across the sands, looking for the teenage boy that the young girl is in love with. And it was animated using this incredible painting style called gouache. So it has this amazing visual quality. And it's never been released in the United States before. And he just today received the Blu-ray 4K UHD, and he just sent this brief say, I just got it super magnifique, you know.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome.
And I'm like, well, that's why we do it. That makes it all
Sure.
worthwhile is when the filmmaker or their family or the creative artists who worked on the movie, as with Felidae, the director and key animation team, are almost all still with us, and were able to contribute to the release, did interviews, and then when they saw the finished film, they're like, "Oh, this is so wonderful to see people finally appreciating something we did that they invested so much creativity and art and hard work into." And in the
No
case
kidding.
of like Felidae, was not a big financial success when it came out because it's an R-rated Don Bluth movie, basically.
Yeah, right.
Like,
Well, that's
looks like
the
this
thing that's
or an American Tale, except it's aimed at an adult audience.
right,
Yeah.
much darker.
Like
I mean-
Like Dogs or Watership Down. And so and most animation then and now is aimed at a family audience. And
Exactly,
apparently
yeah.
they tried to market Felidae to families.
How they marketed it when it first came out is just. That's
I don't know
who-
how they would have done
I
that.
just
Yeah.
realized that's who we should have tried to get an interview with, is the marketing team back then. Like,
Yes.
what were you thinking?
No kidding. No kidding.
Yeah,
Well, you know,
it's
it's-
interviewed some of the animators, and they're like, "Yeah, no, families were taking their kids to see it, and there's,
Oh my
again,
God.
decapitated kitties,
Yeah.
cats having sex, cats getting electrocuted, eviscerated."
I mean,
And-
I saw Watership Down when I was young, and that certainly left its mark. But I feel like this one stepped up a few notches.
Yeah, Watership Down has some violence, but this film has
It's
just some.
yeah,
It's not just violence. There's some actual evil.
no, yeah, it's,
for sure.
It's pretty different.
Oh, it's incredibly dark. It's almost a giallo in some ways. I mean, it's like a film noir, cult mystery, giallo. It mixes up detective story. It mixes up a number of different genres.
But even the ugly cats are adorable, right? Like, that's the challenge of this movie. Is context is everything.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, well, and
Yeah.
we found out that a number of the key animators had worked for Don Bluth in Ireland when he briefly had a animation studio over there, and we also have production sketches they've sent us, some of which included in the Blu-ray booklet, where they would have a rough sketch and it would say kind of Bluethy. So they were aware.
Nailed it.
Yeah, the animators were aware. They're like, I've read the script. Why do you want it to look like a kid's movie?
Yeah, right. Yeah, well, and just even reading the books that it's based on. Before we get too far down into Felidae, I just had a few more questions about distribution, because I think that there's an interesting element to the world of distribution where, I mean, obviously the films that you've distributed, you were able to get the rights, and they also had all of the elements and everything that you needed. And I feel like those are all key parts, obviously, of getting a film distributed, especially some of these, as you said, a lot of them were kind of forgotten, or they just never even made it over here. Are there any that you would say are kind of, I don't know if Holy Grail is really the term, but just films that you're like, oh, I'd love to distribute that, get it out in front of audiences, but either like it's stuck in some rights issues and no one has been able to untangle that web, or there just aren't the right elements to actually give it a proper restoration. Do you have any that you're hoping one day you could magically find all of the right pieces to make it work?
Oh my God, there are so many. That there are some that we tried for years. We spent about 7 years trying to license the rights to Mamoru Oshii's Angel's Egg, and got sold to G Kids, who do a wonderful job, and they'll do a wonderful release with Angel's Egg. But that was a really frustrating one because we had spent so long pursuing it, and then it wound up going somewhere else. There are wonderful, there's like incredible Bollywood movies from the 60s and 70s, like Jewel Thief, the Dev Anand movie I would love to restore, and, or some of the films of Omi Wadia, who was kind of like India's equivalent of Ray Harryhausen. These incredible mythological movies in the 40s, 50s, and 60s with all sorts of pioneering visual effects based on Indian mythology, like Aladdin and His Magic Lamp, and Sri Rambak Hanuman and others have not been able to find rights or elements for any of those. And then there are films that we spend 5 or 6 years patiently pursuing, and we think have slipped out of our grasp, and all of a sudden a deal comes together. There's this amazing Estonian kind of alien sci-fi locked room mystery called Dead Mountaineers Hotel.
Oh yeah,
It was made in 79.
We love that movie.
We've talked about that one on our podcast.
It's fantastic. So we spent about 6 years patiently pursuing the rights to the film with the Estonian Film Center, and every 6 months I would send an email saying, "Hey, we're still interested in Dead Mountaineers Hotel," and they would say, "Oh, no, not now. We're trying to raise money to see if we can get a grant to restore the film." And literally this went on and on and on. I have like an email chain. It was like 45 emails of me saying,
it was a little frustrating because we were like, we will pay for the scan and do the restoration ourselves. You don't need to raise money.
Sure, yeah.
Greg and I had pretty much given up. We were like, I don't think Dead Mountaineers Hotel is going to happen. It's just one of those ones that's like, it's almost there, but not quite. And then about 6 months ago, I said, all right, what the hell? Let me check in. And our contact there said, okay, license.
Hey.
Yeah.
Look at that.
Yeah. They did a new scan off of their elements. Craig is actually waiting to receive the hard drive from Estonia with the new scan and take a look at it and see what's going to be required in terms of restoration, and then we'll share it with of course our partners overseas once it's finished. But that's a movie that Craig likes to joke that often people will license films to us simply because we wear them down. They don't.
Sometimes that works. Yeah,
I can think of vastly worse reasons to license things to you.
Savage Hunter King Schaack and Felidae both actually were also examples of films that took years and years to clear the rights and get the elements. And I think the rights holders eventually were like, we just don't want to hear from these guys anymore. we're just exhausted.
Yeah.
So, all right.
Well,
I don't know why you want these films so badly, but we will license, and we pay them. Like, it's not.
Yeah.
Like
Felidae took so long. We went through like 3
movies.
different people. Like the person we started with talking to, I don't think works there anymore. Then the second person halfway through, like, I think they went on maternity leave. So then we got to a third person. And every time we'd have to start over from scratch because each new person had no idea what we were talking about.
Wow.
Yeah.
God.
I got a question about the restoration process, if I can change gears a little bit, because I'm so curious, especially when you bring. I just watched the trailer for Solomon, and it is beautiful. Hearing what you describe the condition of the source elements that you got, the result is beautiful. What's your stance on how much restoration is important to consider the film properly restored? Because we're not just talking about cleaning it up, we're talking about modernizing it. And are there things that you can't restore? You're putting your stamp on this aging piece of artwork for the future. What are your thoughts in when too far is too far? And
Exactly.
are there
how
any
much grain
places
to remove?
Yeah, how much to remove?
If I'm ever going to err, I'm going to err on the side of doing not enough. I always say that my goal at the end is if you were there at the theater on premiere night and you were seeing the print had never been run before, and it was a print off the original negative on premiere night. That's what I want it to look like.
Gotcha.
Not better than that.
Okay.
So grain, I rarely am gonna, especially if we're working from the original negative, I'm not touching the grain.
Okay.
It's it's film. It's got grain.
Grainy. Yeah.
It's supposed to.
If modern audiences don't like grain, sorry, tough shit.
Yeah.
It's film. Film has grain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not going to make it look like it was shot digitally. That the animation is the same thing. Even that the vintage animation was shot on film. It's still going to have some grain. And with animation, there's a whole nother level that, because it's made by hand, and second, it's made in layers of cells. And if there's dirt on the cell, it's baked into when they shoot it. And each layer can keep adding more and more dirt, because depending on the people doing it, some films, they were very, very good about making sure the cells were clean, and other films, it's
Not
kind of
so
incredible.
much.
It's like there's so much dust and hair and stuff that was on the cells, and that's the one where I kind of try and split the difference. I'm like, I know it was always there because that's how they shot it.
Yeah, right.
Sometimes there's certain shots where there's so much it's distracting from the scene, and I'll try and go in and tamp it down a bit, get rid of some of that baked in dirt, because I know there's always the question of leaving it the way it was versus had they had the ability to do.
Would they have?
Yeah. But in the case of the baked in dirt, I'm like, they had the ability, they just didn't clean it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I anyone like with Felidae was our one of our second HDR. So we did an HDR grade, which that brings in another whole level of what should you and shouldn't you do. And I was happy to read a couple of the reviews I've seen commented that the HDR is not over the top, and I'm like, good, because that was my goal. Like, we wanted to make sure we've got the full depth of color range of all the colors, so it does look different than the non HDR version, but it's not like popping out at you.
Sure.
And we did. I think we went through it like 3 times with Tyler. Doing the grade, and I'd watch it, and almost all my notes were simply if a shot came on screen and it distracted me at all, that I'm like, oh, that's bright. That was my note. I'm like, dial it back.
Too much.
I don't want things jumping out at me. I want to be immersed. You want to be pulled in. I don't want things popping out at me. And so that's at least how I feel about HDR is I want it to be more immersive, not gimmicky.
Well, in the spirit of creating that sort of visual mix, right? That you're mastering for today's and tomorrow's technology, right? In the spirit of I want this to look like it did when you would have seen it when it released in theaters and no better. In some respects, you kind of want it to look a little bit better because I'm watching it on gear that I never would have had access to before, right? And as a consumer of a Dolby Vision setup, I kind of want it to look like it fits there, right? Is there any thought that goes into that?
The technology itself is going to do that. Like even if you watched the standard, if you didn't watch the HDR, you just took the regular Blu-ray, and you had it playing back on an OLED TV, and you had it playing back on an older TV right next to it, they're going to look completely different. Mm-hmm. But that's not my master doing it. That's the technology TV. You're playing it back on.
Sure.
So my goal is to keep it looking like it was originally supposed to look. The OLED itself is going to expand the contrast.
Sure.
On its own.
Right.
Well, and then there'll be instances as with like the Savage Hunt of King Stack. We looked at a previous restoration that the rights holders had done. There's a scene in a graveyard where it's raining, and whoever did the restoration had used scratch removal software that thought the rain was like scratches or dirt, and they literally removed it.
Oh my God.
No rain. So there's all sorts of stuff that kind of get done in the name of, I mean, color grade, we could have a whole conversation just about how color grade influences the style, the tone, the feel of a movie. And if you don't have the filmmaker or the original cinematographer there, you're trusting that whoever does the color grade is going to be sympathetic and sensitive to how the film is supposed to look. One of the animated films that Craig worked on restoring previously for one of our previous companies was Marcel Yankovic's The Son of the White Mare. And we're actually just about to release his last film, this nearly 3-hour animated epic called The Tragedy of Man. And Yankovic has passed away a couple of years ago, but Craig was able to work with him on the Son of the White Mare restoration. And there were a couple instances where he asked Craig to radically change the color grade in certain sequences, from Craig, it was like brown to purple or purple to green or something, like a major change.
Yeah, it was a dramatic change because we had the scans from the original negative, so I know what the cell animation looked like.
Yeah,
you know? Yeah. And that's not what he wanted it to look like. And I was like, okay, but that's what it looked like.
Well, and that's also a tricky line because I remember
changing what the original, changing what the film.
Right, because I remember when I think William Friedkin did a restoration of the French Connection when it first came out on Blu-ray, I think, and radically changed the way that the color tones looked through the whole film and got a lot of flack for it. And then they ended up doing a different version that kind of put it back the way it had been. But that's another whole side of things of creators who come back later and go, oh, what? Let's just keep playing and kind of continue making modifications.
Yeah, I interviewed Friedkin many times, and he was like a vaudeville performer. I saw him actually do pratfalls fall out of a director's to get a laugh.
Oh my goodness!
He was a really interesting character. He invited me to do the audio commentary with him, one of his movies, and I was so excited. I was like, oh my God, what's it going to be? Is it going to be, French Connection or Exorcist or even The Brink's Job or whatever? And it was The Guardian.
Oh, wow. Okay.
His cult killer tree spirit movie, which is one of his silliest films.
That's so funny.
I haven't heard the commentary we did together in many years, probably since we did it, but Friedkin was like, what was I thinking? This is a really silly film.
Oh my gosh.
But he was I think he said when The Exorcist came out, it was in first run, limited release, I think, initially. He said he went to each of the theaters and tested their projection and sound. And if it wasn't up to par,
Wow.
he had them, sort of Warner Brothers force them to upgrade.
Good for him.
Yeah.
And he was very much, I think, at least, when I interviewed him, a fan of what digital technology had to offer, because he said, would I rather see The Exorcist on a DCP where every time it's going to look like I intended it to?
Exactly. Right.
A 35 millimeter print where after 25 or 30 screenings, it's got scratches. The film may have broken. There may be jumps, the changeovers.
Yeah, right.
I love film. I wrote a book about obsessive film collectors and film dealers that came out in 2016. And I screened thousands and thousands of prints over the year when I was with the Cinematheque. But everything we do in terms of distribution is in the digital sphere now. Like we go, for most of our films, start analog. So we'll scan from hopefully the original 35 millimeter camera negatives, transfer the sound materials. Then all the work that Craig does in terms of restoration, all the distribution we do, Blu-ray, 4K, UHD, streaming, sending digital DCPs. It's all in the digital sphere now. And I see there's so much, especially in terms of restoration, that you can do digitally that you could never do photochemically. And it's pretty remarkable. A lot of the rest.
Color grading is probably
Coleman King could never have been restored photochemically. Just you would have said, no, I'm sorry, it's gone. We can't.
Right.
Yeah. So
well,
you love the digital toolkit and what it's enabled us and Craig to do.
And if you've got a good 4K scan, and then you make a 4K DCP, and it's played back on a proper 4K projector, it's going to look like film on the screen.
Sure.
Yeah.
Like the folks that demand they want to see everything on a 35 millimeter print they're just obsessed with seeing the damage, because a proper DCP is going to still look like film. It's just not going to have the damage. So it's the damage that they want, which I don't quite. Being someone who cleans that stuff up, I don't get it.
You don't want that there. No, exactly.
They don't want to see it on that first night at the premiere. They want to see it in the second run theater after it's been projected 1,000 times. That's what they want to see. I'm like, I don't. Okay.
There's something about that, I guess. Yeah.
Well,
let's shift gears and talk about Felidae a little bit more now. We've brought it up a few times, but this is one of the films that you two have restored. It just recently released it, and it's gorgeous the way that it was put together. But it's such an interesting film. My first question for you two would be like, how did this film cross your paths? Like, where was it that you first heard about it and saw it? Because it's difficult to. I mean, it had been difficult to find up until you restored it.
I first saw it as a crappy bootleg on YouTube.
Okay.
And being cat obsessed and loving animation and loving, edgier stuff. It checked all the boxes for me, and I was like, Dennis, we need to do this movie.
It's the third animated cat feature we've put out. And
I saw someone on Reddit. I was reading.
It too maybe is coincidence.
Yeah.
Bela Turnovsky's Cat City is this amazing Hungarian kind of animated sci-fi film. In a kind of like Danger Mouse vein, super fun. And then we did Tamala 2010, a punk cat in space. It's amazing Japanese kind of meta psychedelic anime. and then Felidae is the third. So there's definitely there's a
Well,
theme.
I saw someone on Reddit asked the other day. They're like, "Is Deaf Crocodile leading the pack with releasing films where the lead character is a cat?" And everyone pretty much agreed that we were, and I let them know. I'm like, yeah, it's not by accident. we're looking for more.
I am cat obsessed. I admit it.
Felidae was really difficult because it was adapted from the first in a series of very successful young adult kind of detective mystery novels, all set in the world of cats. Kind of, I guess, so you would sort of say maybe loosely based on a sort of Sherlock Holmes kind of pattern where there's murders and Francis, who is the hero of the stories, investigates and solves them.
He's got his sidekick.
Yeah, Bluebeard, Blaubart in the German. But the books were written by a Turkish-German immigrant named Akif Pirinçci, who unfortunately in the last few years has kind of come out with some very anti-immigrant and hard right political statements in Germany, and became kind of persona non grata in the mainstream. So when we approached the company that holds the rights now, they were not the original distributor for the film. They inherited it, bought it as part of a big film library. They, kind of kept putting us off. And finally, at one point, they were like, why do you want to restore and release this film? Like, do you know what it's based on? And we were like, yes, but the message of the film itself,
it's kind of
it's
really very different than
it feels the opposite of his opinions, which is interesting. Yeah.
And we think it stands on its own as this really wonderful, mysterious, entertaining animated feature for adults. So finally, we kind of wore them down. That was another instance of like every 4 or 5 months when we would follow up, it seemed like the person we were dealing with left the company. And so we had to start all over again. And then finally we had a license agreement and they couldn't find the film elements. Or the person that had found them for us left the company, and the new person was like, "Yeah, we don't know where it is." And we were
I was like,
no.
I've got emails. They gave me a list. They literally gave me a list of the elements you have available, and he's like, "I don't know where they are." I'm like,
geez.
Well, and
starting from scratch, yeah.
Finally, we get the elements shipped to Pharos Post Group in Germany, who did the 4K scan, and they sent us an email saying, hey, it's a really good thing that you are scanning it now because we opened the cans and they're going vinegar. The vinegar syndrome is an irreversible process where, essentially the chemicals that are used to develop a film print continue very slowly eating away at the film stock itself. Produces acetic acid that smells like oil and vinegar salad dressing.
Yeah.
And once it starts, it can't be reversed. There are things you can do possibly to slow it down, but it will eventually destroy the film. It will warp it until it's unusable.
So obviously, at some point or a long period of its 30 years, it wasn't in climate-controlled storage. Or because 30 years, it should be absolutely fine if it was stored properly.
Mm-hmm. Sure. I mean, there's plenty of older films that have lasted. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a good thing. Had we not pushed and been very patient and persistent, within a year, 2 years, that camera negative will be unusable. We're not going to be able to do a scan. It ran through the scanner perfectly. But they're like, yeah, you got it just in time.
It's on its way.
Wow.
Yeah, so this is probably the last scan that will ever be done off of the camera negative. Now, I don't know if there's other material, did they do an inner positive or an inner negative for the film? maybe, but who knows where that is?
Yeah, it sounds like they don't even know where stuff like that
Yeah,
would be.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jeez.
So we got to it just in time. We were actually connected with the rights holder through the director, Michael Schaack, who was a
Yeah, you tracked him down pretty quickly.
very, very successful and prolific animator and filmmaker in Germany. In the 80s and 90s, did a number of successful movies, and has now left the animation business kind of loose on a beautiful farm out in the countryside. And I think he was, kind of bemused and excited that we were interested in this film, which at the time it was made was the most expensive animated feature ever produced in Germany. And it was produced because it was so ambitious and complicated. They had satellite animation teams in Ireland, in Canada, in South Korea. And this is all pre-internet. So they're animating these sequences, and then they're faxing images, or they're
they were saying like a good chunk of the budget was just FedEx charges.
Oh my
back
God!
And forth. There's no like we're going to scan this
and
do it on a Google Drive or a Dropbox. Nope, it's all like I can't even imagine how complicated. And the main headquarters animation team was in Germany, Hamburg, I think, where Michael Schaack had his offices at the time. But even when we did the interviews for the bonus features, we were talking to animators in Ireland, in LA, in Canada.
Yeah, they're still all over.
Everywhere.
All over. Michael is in Germany now. But we were really fortunate. Paul Bolger, who was one of the lead animators on the film, we commissioned him.
Yeah, he did the original character designer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Beautiful new artwork for the slipcase in the style of cell animation, and he's like, "I have."
Yeah, so he did it. He did it. Yeah, the
25 years.
The deluxe edition cover is a fully painted background with the cats are a cell animation overlay. So it's literally how they would have made the film is how he made the cover for the deluxe edition.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. I think he said, "Do you want me to do this digitally?" And Craig was like, "No."
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, definitely not digitally.
I can do it digitally. And Craig was like, "No."
Yeah, right. No kidding.
Analog way.
And
like,
also,
this in a long time.
Like I can see your background. You've got the original poster there, and we were like, yes, not as happy and cheery and aimed for kids as the original either.
Yeah, right.
For sure.
Well, it's a very dark movie. I mean, we mentioned the Plague Dogs, Watership Down, but I mean, this is a story about a cat who moves to a new neighborhood and then suddenly is thrust into a world of murder as dead bodies keep turning up, and he kind of goes into detective mode with his buddy Bluebeard and starts trying to figure out who is behind all of these deaths. And it is a dark story, and he's got some incredibly dark nightmares as well that really kind of kick things up to another level.
The nightmare sequences are really incredible.
Yeah.
That's some dark stuff.
Oh yeah,
right.
Francis and his owner, the can opener. I love how they refer to him as can opener.
Perfect.
And since we have a dog and two cats ourselves, we are absolutely can openers.
Yeah.
As soon as he moves into the house, the first thing he's like, there's a weird smell of green mold, and it's not coming from below; it's coming from above.
Yeah.
And immediately, he goes outside, he meets Bluebeard, and they see a cat who's had its throat ripped out. You're immediately launched.
Yeah, that's not 5 minutes into the film.
Right.
Really.
And when you say ripped out, I mean, we're not talking about like shot in a way where you can't quite tell. I mean, it's right there
really
in front of you. You're looking at it. Yeah, this is really a graphic bloody film. Yeah.
Spoiler alert, most horrifying moment in the film, one of the most
Yeah,
disturbing.
pause now. Skip
It's-
this if you haven't
Yeah.
seen it yet.
Yeah, right.
Is when he discovers the beautiful blind female cat Felicity has been murdered and gruesomely decapitated. We're talking like Argento, Fulci level decapitation. And even the Claudandus crazy religious cult of cats that he discovers upstairs, where the cats are willingly jumping into this electric current and being electrified as like a kind of like a Jim Jones cult, or the sequence at Carousel in Logan's Run. They're all like exploded, and I'm like, and even in the dialogue, it says truly these activities were far beyond the Aristocats.
Right. It even has the Disney reference. Yeah.
It even has a Disney reference. No. Francis has this great voiceover, which of course is so typical of like film noir and detective stories, that he's narrating the action as it's unfolding. There's so many weird, amazing, Josiah, the guardian of the dead, when they go into the catacombs, discover this incredible ossuary charnel house filled with thousands of skulls and skeletons of dead cats. I mean, really is got a lot of cult horror elements in the film, in addition to being a kind of detective mystery.
Which reminded me, actually, in the scope of detective stories, weirdly, one of the first films I thought of was The Young Sherlock Holmes, because that was, as a kid, it was probably my first Sherlock Holmes film that I watched, and it dealt with some occult story. It kind of had this detective story, but also very occult, and also going to things like Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, like these sorts of stories that we were watching as kids that definitely had these darker turns with kind of this cultish imagery, and this definitely fits into that vein.
Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom is like kind of infamously, why wasn't that rated R? Because I remember I saw it when I was a kid, and there's some scenes in there where it's like, wow, if this wasn't a Spielberg film, this would have gotten an R rating.
But
it's definitely kind of in that vein where it's like it's got elements of the noir. It's almost kind of got like a cop buddy thing with Francis and Bluebeard, which I love the Bluebeard character so much. But the more I think about, like, he brings some levity and some laughs to the film. But as far as the plot goes, like, he's just kind of tagging along. Like, he's following Francis around and is really just interested in finding food.
But there's also this tragedy with him, because later in the film, as they're starting to piece everything together, like, he's recognizing like things have happened to him also, and he's missing an eye, and he looks down at his paw at one point when he later in the film, realizing like that these are the people that perhaps are behind exactly what has happened to him, and it's like his own recognition of all of that, I thought was really for me powerful with that character.
It's really disturbing in a kind of plague dogs fashion, that clearly these cats were being used for genetic experiments and to create a sort of pure master race of cats. I had to say, this is a perfect time in the world we live in now to put out a film from Germany that talks about people wanting to sort of create a genetically pure master race.
Yeah. Eugenics by way of cats is it's a subversive and yet maybe on the nose way to get a dialogue going about what's going on in the world. Especially when the originator is leaning now, in new directions, darker directions.
I subscribe to is it always right to punch a Nazi? Yes, it is always. It's always a good day to punch a Nazi. I mean, I grew up in a world in which Nazis were absolute evil. What they did was truly monstrous. And the fact that we're now living in a world where people are somehow questioning, like, no, I mean, I knew a film producer, Branko Lustig. He was Croatian, and he went on to produce Schindler's List and Kingdom of Heaven. And he was in the camps as a child, and he still had the concentration camp numbers tattooed on his arm.
Oh,
like,
geez.
No, don't screw around with this shit.
Yeah, no kidding.
It's always a good day to punch a Nazi. Is my motto.
Yeah.
So
no kidding.
So yeah, we are. I think it is it is great that we're putting this German movie out from the 90s that has this really kind of strong, dark message about creation of a pure master race.
How does ideology writ large impact your selection of films? I mean, this is one we're kind of getting to through the back door in this conversation about how you feel personally about the world at large and releasing a movie whose timing is right there. But I also notice you do a lot of other films that have some interesting messages around that might be otherwise considered subversive. Zero Grad, even Dead Mountaineers Hotel. Like these are movies that have interesting commentary on the politics of the time. How does that define your motivation for securing the rights to films that you restore?
I mean, I think most of the films we put out sort of sit at the intersection of art house filmmaking and genre filmmaking. Some are more in the art house end, some are more in the genre end. I think primarily it's movies that we get really excited about, in terms of the visuals, the narrative that have sort of slipped through the cracks of film history. I don't think I don't know, Craig. We don't sort of.
I mean, a lot of our stuff
ideology so much.
Yeah, a lot of our films have been coming out of Eastern Europe, and they're from the time period towards the end of the Soviet Union, and that's what the artists were doing. They were commenting on what was going on, and they had to do it in kind of subversive ways. They couldn't just outwardly say it, so they created art that said it. Mm-hmm. And I don't think we haven't really actively been looking for like we need to make a statement on this, that, or the other. That's what the artists were doing, and those are the films that we've discovered and found and enjoyed. So yeah, we haven't been actively looking for stuff like that. I would say we would actively avoid stuff that we strongly disagreed with. But we haven't been actively looking for stuff that has these messages in them. It's just that's what the artists were. That's what they were creating at the time for where they were at the time.
Yeah, we've actually passed on a couple films that really interesting movies, but depicted what we think is actual on-screen cruelty towards animals, where animals were hurt or even killed in the making of the film, not animated, as
right?
Yeah, sure,
right.
Live action, and Craig and I, we've looked at them a couple times and said, yeah, no, I don't think we could put this out. It just doesn't seem right. In the case of like Zero Grad and Kin Zaza, which is this other amazing Soviet spy film, both of those are very much movies about the dissolution, breakup of the Soviet Union. They really are like the end of the USSR, and we interviewed Pirinçci, who's the director of Zero Grad, and he's like, "Oh yeah, no, this was actually the last movie of the Soviet. It was what was released in theaters when the Soviet Union was dissolving, and there were people who would stand up in the theater and get in arguments that said this movie was either pro-Soviet Union or anti-Soviet Union. But he sort of confirmed, he said, yeah, no, the film was very much about the breakup of the USSR.
Yeah.
And then ironically, you know, we've put out 4 films by the wonderful Russian filmmaker Alexander Tushko. The first that we put out, Ilya Muromets, it's really fascinating because it's set during the period of the Kievan Rus, which is the semi-mythical forerunner of modern Ukraine and Russia. And Ilya Muromets was a little bit like King Arthur. It's not entirely clear that there was a real historical figure named Ilya Muromets, although there is a monastery in Kiev today, I believe, that claims that they have the skeleton of the real Ilya Muromets, but probably was mostly mythical. But at the time the film was made in the late 1950s, it was clearly meant as a pro-USSR sort of nationalistic story. And it's a really visually beautiful. It has all this incredible visual effects. But it's about Ilya Muromets, this great hero of the Kievan Rus, who is defending it against these Mongol Tartar invaders. Well, we put out the film now, though, and you have Ukraine being invaded from the outside by Russia.
Yeah.
So it has a very different message, even though it's the same film, but because politics have changed so much, you can kind of look at it through a very different lens.
Ilya's, defending Kyiv from an invasion, which it plays, very differently.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
And it's weird also that the reason Putin invaded Ukraine is because he's trying to get back to this Kiev Rus, it's just weird.
The reunification of Russia and Ukraine, like in the 10th century, we're talking about.
Right. Yeah.
Which ironically is the period in which Ilya Muromets is. So while it is quote unquote just fantasy film, it has a very complex kind of political background and message, both the time it was made in the late 1950s and the audience it was aimed at then, and looking at it now in 2025. I love Alexander Tushko's
they're gorgeous films.
Sort of a combination of Mario Bava and Ray Harryhausen and Nathan Duran, who made these beautiful, sweeping, sort of folklore-inspired movies. Ruslan and Lyudmila, it's gorgeous. The Tale of Tsar Sultan. But they weren't made in a vacuum, like Felidae. And that is a really fascinating thing, is to kind of look at them both, how they were received and made at the time, but also how we're kind of interpreting them now through a very different lens. Which changes day by day.
Yeah, no kidding.
Especially now.
Yeah. Jeez.
Yeah.
Did the book Felidae also? I mean, assuming that the film was largely just based on the first book, and that the first book had essentially this plot with it, with the eugenics and everything.
I think it tracks pretty closely to the first one.
Obviously, it sounds like it wasn't exactly the success that Michael Schaack had been hoping for with it. But I mean, in your conversations with him in the initial days, early when he started working on this, was the hope to actually kind of continue adapting more of the books?
I'm sure that
I don't remember anyone saying anything, but because that it was still early 90s. It wasn't the mentality wasn't then. We're like, well, we're going to make 17 of these.
Not quite.
It was like, well, let's make
the Felidae cinematic universe. Can we? Have that?
Let's make one. If it's a huge hit, then maybe they'd be like, well, that did well. Maybe we'll do the next book. which is a shame because the like I said, I love the Blue Bart Francis combo. Like their
nice
friendship
relationship.
is
Yeah.
so great. I'm just so sad we got just the one movie.
Yeah.
And I think I don't even think the books are currently in print in Germany, where they were extremely successful.
Yeah.
But I think the publisher has since stopped publishing them because of the author is sort of very right wing.
Well, I think Amazon even stopped carrying them. Like I think all you can get now are like, third party copies of the books.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. Of course, the funny thing is as soon as we announced the film, everybody asked, "Is it going to have the English dubbed track on it?"
I read that there was a lot of questions about that. Like Cary Elwes actually had to answer in some Reddit forum or something.
Oh, really?
That he's just like, I know people keep asking me if I was in it. It's like it must have been a doppelganger of mine because I've never done an English.
I think I found at
it.
least 2 different things online where it lists like the English voice actors, and they're completely different lists.
Yeah,
and ultimately, I think all of the people who did it weren't famous people, but there's at least 2 lists of like famous actors that are accredited to this film that they had nothing to do with it.
I know, it was crazy people. It was like Patrick Stewart and Cary Elwes and all this. And I maybe that was announced like when they were trying to sell the film at a market or something.
And it could just be a fantasy casting,
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. Well, the English dubbed track that eventually was done, unfortunately, it's the rights are not controlled by the rights holder in Germany any longer.
Oh, that's interesting.
This is the case. I think with most fans, I understand that they foreign language animation, they want the original dubbed version if it was released in English speaking territories. The reality is that those versions were usually produced not by the producer of the movie or the rights holder today, but by a distributor in the United States or the UK or Australia that no longer has the rights. In many cases, they don't even exist anymore.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, it'd be like if we wanted to create an English dub for Tamala, and we paid for it.
Yeah.
It would be we'd have the rights to that English dub, not the rights holder of Tamala. So then 30 years later, someone wants to release Tamala again, and we're long gone. Like, who do they reach out to? Like,
sure, yeah.
And these are in some cases for dubbed versions, they're well-known actors. We don't know what the contracts were. We don't know if they're owed residuals, if the film gets released again using their dubbed voices. And so in the case of Felidae, we asked Wild Bunch Germany, who own the rights, and they said, we have no records. We have nothing in our legal rights, so we can't license you to include the English dub track because we didn't produce it. I mean, they're not the original distributor of the film anyhow, but they're like, we don't know that we own it, so we can't license it to you. So we did ask, and that's the case. We're putting out this wonderful Soviet animated film later this year called The Snow Queen. And it was released in the early 60s here in the U.S. by Universal with some, well-known actors at the time like Tommy Kirk. Universal has nothing to do with the movie anymore, and that English dubbed track they cut the movie down so it doesn't actually match the full-length version. They changed some of the film.
That also happens a lot. Is that the dubbed version will be on a different edit as well, so they're not even going to sync.
Yeah. But too, it's like the company that produced that at the time has no rights to the movie anymore. So we like licensing, a English dubbed track for a movie that's put out over 5 years ago. They're like, "What are you talking?"
Did you have to deal at all with new rights and negotiations to get the Boy George song? Because I mean, that was a nice surprise to have Boy George suddenly pop up singing the song for the film. But
fortunately, since they commissioned that, I'm assuming it was in work for hire, and that's part of.
So they owned it.
Soundtrack elements.
Okay, good.
Yeah, that's
it might have been different if it were just a Boy George song that they used for the film.
Sure. Yeah,
but this was, I mean, it's literally Felidae.
Yeah, right. That's the name of the song.
I remember the first time I watched it, I saw in the credits, I was like, Boy George. I'm like, and why is it in English?
Yeah, right. I know.
It's a very good question.
He's like singing, I think part of the lyrics. So he's like singing Felidae.
Yeah. That's the chorus.
Right. Yeah.
No, that's just another one of the really weird, wonderful things about the movie.
Ann Dudley's score was great. She's a great composer. Great. Yeah, it
just reminded me. You had asked about in the restoration of things, how far do you change or modernize things?
Right.
And there was one thing in particular with Felidae that was they had all the elements. So we had the real one with all the opening titles, but they also had which with the opening titles for almost all films, what they'll do is they'll create the optical with the titles overlaid over the picture, and then they'll cut that new optical negative into the reel.
Sure.
Unfortunately, most places then just throw away the original negative that was just the background without the optical.
Yeah.
They actually had both. So I had the original negative without the opticals.
Because there's always a little degradation in the image quality.
Yeah, it's actually significant.
Yeah.
And so we recreated all the opening titles. We matched the font, we matched the color. And so the opening titles we were able to recreate over the original negative, so we didn't lose that image quality in the opening sequence. So yeah, it's one of those rare occasions where we created something new, because I usually don't want to do something like that, but this case it was like, it's the titles and the image quality is so much better.
Yeah, right,
and it's so rare that you have the opportunity to do that. Like the original backgrounds are usually not available.
Yeah.
We took advantage.
A lot of old films, whenever a dissolve is coming up.
Oh yeah, all of a sudden the picture quality just drops.
Yeah.
The
dissolve always gets real muddy. Yep.
Yeah, and it's not just
muddy because that was an optical effect. And
not just dissolves. A lot of times I noticed it, which is funny. Like this is long before I even knew what I was noticing. I think it was the original Terminator, where I was watching it, and then every once in a while the image quality would just drop, and I didn't know why. And then after watching it enough times, I realized, every time there's like a big explosion or something, because it's an optical effect.
Oh.
So every time there's some sort of special effect, the image quality would drop. Yeah. And I was like, it's every time they do an effect, the image quality drops because they had to do optical effects, which is, it's a duplicate of the negative, and that's why the image quality drops. Is before all this stuff was done digitally.
Yeah,
right.
Well, the original Terminator, every time I've watched the film, I'm like, the first half of this movie is really cheesy. It's really crappy, like almost like straight to video, like VHS 80s, and then it gets markedly better. Like the second half is like a James Cameron movie, right? It's got, the editing and the action and everything. It really picks up.
Well, because he's really good at action. He's really bad at dialogue.
Apparently, they ran out of money. They shot, and I don't know if they shot completely in sequence. So
they shot the end first when they had the budget, and then they phoned it in on the beginning.
I'd like to think that it was the other way around. I think they had to stop for 8 or 9 months to raise more money. And I like to think that in that 8 or 9 months, like Cameron figured out how to like become James Cameron,
make a movie.
But there is this marked difference, like between the really cheesy first half of the Terminator and then like the really.
I haven't watched it in a while. The last time I tried watching Terminator 2, I couldn't get through it. Like James Cameron dialogue is.
No,
Everything gets better once you have closed boots and a motorcycle, right?
It's so bad.
I still love Terminator 2. I think it really holds up.
If there were a way to just turn off the center channel, like you got all the music and effects, you just don't have to hear anyone talk. It's probably fantastic.
I think Terminator 2 for me still really holds up. It's like Road Warrior. It is one.
Well, the action sequences are unparalleled.
Great.
Like it's the of course the motorcycle chase and the giant tow truck crashing into, like, it's just mind blowing. You're like, holy cow! Like wow. But then they start.
I think isn't that movie you're supposed to just turn the volume down and listen to the wall while you're watching that movie? I'm sure I heard that somewhere. Syncs up perfectly.
Oh my gosh. Well, it has been so much fun talking to both of you about Felidae and all the tangents we've been going on. Thank you both so much for coming and joining us. No, hey,
perfect.
It's fantastic. We love it.
Should have been.
We love it. We love
Sorry it took us so long to schedule this.
Oh, no.
Thank you for your patience and persistence.
Absolutely. Hey, we're like you. We'll just keep bugging you until it finally happens. Yeah.
It works.
We're happy
look at that.
Chat with you guys anytime. It's been super fun.
Fantastic.
Real treasure.
Tell everybody, like, what links should people be checking as far as learning more about Deaf Crocodile and all the releases, and just finding you two out there on the socials?
Yeah, well, we're on most of the socials. Most active on probably Instagram, Blue Sky, Twitter. I still post too. I'll still post things there, but I don't interact there as much. We'll still post on stuff on Facebook, but most interaction is going to be Blue Sky, and I try popping into Reddit and keeping up with what people are talking about there. And then
is that under Deaf Crocodile or under
no,
you?
It's my personal account.
Okay,
so.
Gotcha.
And then if you go to the website, the best way to keep up with us is if you go to the website, a pop-up will usually come up and offer you to sign up for the newsletter, which I think at most really we do like once a week. Sometimes we miss a week because we try to do it on Fridays, and sometimes I'm working and I look and I'm like, oh shoot,
whoops,
it was Friday.
Yeah, right.
We missed his newsletter. Got to get it out real quick.
But yeah, that's the best way to know, to not miss out on announcements and whatnot. We've got our own podcast. We'll be recording Thursday morning. So we'll talk about the new release. That podcast drops on the Friday that we announce what's coming out next. And then we'll usually talk about the films that are being announced, and then go on tangents and talk about God knows what, as we do.
And you can order our discs directly through us if you're in the U.S. deafcrocodile.com. You can also order through our distribution partner, Diabolic DVD, Jesse Nelson, everyone there. We love. They've been great. And they will also ship overseas. So if you're an international buyer, you could get our discs through diabolicdvd.com. And then also our standard editions, so the deluxe limited editions are available through us at diabolicdvd.com, and they are increasingly limited to like 1,000 units. So encourage people.
There's a small handful of other places they'll they pop up, but it's primarily some
Mostly
Diabolic
those.
for the deluxe editions. And then, like
Gotcha.
Dennis was saying, the standard editions now are showing up kind of everywhere. Is the goal.
Nice.
So,
Yeah.
Yeah. So on Amazon, so we work with MVD Music Video Distributors for standard editions now on Amazon through a lot of big brick and mortar stores around the country.
Yeah.
So, Felidae, Trapped Ashes, Felidae, in fact, has been selling really, really well, both for us and Diabolic and the Deluxe Limited, as well as now on Amazon. The standard edition, it's doing really well, which is great. I'm so happy that we
People are
share
finding it.
news with Michael Schaack and Paul Bolger and a lot of the animators, and they're like, this is so cool to see this movie that they all really love and put so much creativity and heart into, and was not financially successful at the time.
Yeah.
Now, many years later, people coming around, they're going, "Oh, this is fantastic!"
Finally getting a chance.
Well,
to
yeah,
see it.
Michael
great.
Schaack is, like you had said, is not even working in the industry anymore. And I had asked him, because I collect art, and I was like, "You don't happen to have any of the original cells or anything, do you?" And he's like, "Let me look." And he's like, "Yeah." He's like, "Most of it's all gone, but he had a handful of them in his garage." And I was like, I will gladly pay you for one. And he's like, "Oh no, just give me your address. I'll just send them to you."
No,
Wow.
some of the original cells of Francis.
Amazing. Holy
oh my
cow.
God.
Yeah. So there's like a handful from like one scene, and it's not the backgrounds. It's literally, it's just like Francis's head, but it's like, it's so cool. But
That's awesome.
But he was so out of the industry. He's like, "Yeah, they're in my garage. I think I'll look."
Yeah. That's awesome.
No, that really does. That is kind of what makes it all worthwhile. Is the filmmakers. I've been a filmmaker myself, and when somebody is able to show a lot of care and sensitivity to the original artwork, and then try and shine a light on it, and the audience rediscovers it and really gets into it, that does make it all worthwhile. And then we can share it with the filmmakers, and they're like, "Oh, this is great. Took a long time, but now people
got there."
Felidae or Delta Space Mission or The Outcasts, or some of these movies that we've been able to restore and put out."
That's amazing.
Yeah, just like people knowing they're appreciated. It
They definitely feel it.
I mean, even from our end of things, when you order stuff, I guess there's a window or something where you can put a note, which I didn't know. It's in the checkout process. And I look and I see like so many people buy our discs, and they'll put a note in there just thanking us, or saying, "Oh, we really appreciate what you do and keep up the good work." And it's like, it just makes you feel good. It's like, people actually appreciate what you're doing.
That's amazing.
And so, it's the same way with the filmmakers. Like, they've forgotten about the stuff that they did so long ago, and they're like, "Oh, wow, like people still really like that."
Yeah, no, that's
like,
awesome.
yes, it's fantastic.
Well, it's a film definitely worth checking out.
Of rare favorite movies that they would love to see restored, they can reach us through our website at deafcrocodile.com, and please send us, because a lot of the films we wind up.
Oh, we get.
I'm sure you're getting requests all the time.
We do, and it's fantastic. We had one person who sent us this big long list, and there's 4 films on his list now that we've signed. So
no kidding. Oh, that's fantastic.
So like
cool.
it's when we say send us your list, we mean it. We will look into them.
That's awesome. Well, Felidae is a film worth checking out. Everybody should check it. We will have links in the show notes for the socials for these guys in Deaf Crocodile and everything. Again, both of you, we really appreciate you joining us here today. And for everyone else out there, we hope you like the show, and we certainly hope you like the movie like we do here on Movies We Like. Movies We Like is a part of the True Story FM Entertainment Podcast Network and the Next Reel family of film podcasts. The music is Chonk Clap by Out of Flux. Find the show at truestory.fm and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Threads, and Letterboxd at The Next Reel. Learn about becoming a member at thenextreel.com/membership. And if your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, we always appreciate it if you drop one in there for us. See you next time.